Hi, I'm Dre with Forecast Hope. I want to welcome you to our weekly Thursday get together. Today, we will go into some detail that has to do with persuasion, right? We all love getting yeses, but we also understand how difficult it is to be told yes, right? We hear no's and maybes and I'm not sure's, but is there a way to influence and persuade other people so that we can hear yes more often? And I can tell you the answer is yes. And that's what we'll go over. I'm actually pulling just a sliver of the course that I'm putting together for the You Forecast Hope community. So this episode is brought to you by You Forecast Hope. If you want to go to youforecasthope.com, you can and see and learn more about that. But it's basically a membership site that is focused on helping people overcome doubt and their fear of failure so that they can accomplish their goals and be confident in their abilities to become the champion of their dream life. So, with that out the way, I will go ahead and get started. So, there are lots of ways to influence people. There are good ways and there are not so good ways. There are the ways that are kind of like the person knows what's going on, and then there are ways that are a little bit more manipulative. We're going to focus on the good ways, and you're going to kind of see where that line is at as we talk about some of them because there are some manipulations that people will take advantage of people, right? Like guilt tripping is one of the negative ones. People will, maybe you've seen like a panhandler or something like that where they're on the news and they actually have a car and a house and everything's fine, but they kind of dress dirty and then they ask for clothes and they ask for like donation and people feel bad for them and they guilt you. Or maybe you've had experiences with certain friends, family members, or coworkers where they ask you stuff. And the more common ones that we probably all heard is if you ever win the lottery, you will be receiving lots and lots of letters. I've actually saw that. It was very fascinating that once you win the lottery, that you will receive hundreds of letters of people saying kind of what they're going through, that they need money for this surgery for their kid, or they're going to lose their house, or something like that. You have like all of your families kind of show up and they're like, oh, we're related. You didn't know? Right? Like there is a lot of manipulation that goes on. We are not going to focus on that. Today we are going to talk about persuasion. And the difference for me and the way that I will teach it to you is persuasion is building a bond of trust with the individual. And then you are going to use that bond of trust to persuade them and they will agree with you. They will see it as mutually beneficial. They will not look at it from the angle of, I'm going to do this for you, right? That scratch my back, I scratch your back. We're not really doing that. There is a place for that, but that's not what we're focusing on in this get together. So there are three ways to influence and persuade someone to get more yeses in your life. Number one is logical. If you speak with someone with rational facts, figures in a sensible manner, you will find that they will come around to some of the information that you're sharing with them. Then number two is emotional. And within emotional, we're going to touch on really connecting that logical to them in a personal manner. So we want them to be able to relate internally to what you're saying. So maybe you would share like a story or you would really find some way with their values and everybody kind of loves that feeling of helping out the greater good. And so if you're able to work your storyline, work whatever you're trying to figure out within that framework, it will work much better than if it's only logic. And we'll go into much deeper detail as we continue. And number three is collaborative or cooperation. Collaborative is a form of cooperation. And when you cooperate, it's getting other people's buy-ins. So there within cooperation is collaboration, which is hey, let's do this kind of together. We can kind of exchange ideas, bounce them off each other. Number two would be consultation, and you're asking them for their input. And number three would be alliance. So that is when either you are working within people that you've already built a network with, or you are reaching out for someone who has an authority within something that you need. And, like if I had to make it in a simple term, it would be like an endorsement. So it would be like, oh, I want to sell more stuff to this type of demographics. And then the company goes and finds someone to endorse their product that fits within that. So that would be basically what we're talking about there. So you're going to use one of these three, and I'm actually going to help you work on using all three of them because I believe that it's really how you persuade people is you have to be logical, right? It has to make sense, but it has to have an emotional connection. Basically, why does it matter to me? And then you want to have the collaboration aspect of it where you're cooperating with each other, where you're working together, where it is mutually beneficial. You are making them kind of like I would think of it when you're trying to apply for a job and they write like an entrepreneurial spirit down there at the bottom when they're explaining like what kind of person they're looking for. It's kind of like that. When what they're saying is they would want someone who's kind of like a self-starter who will see stuff and recommend some changes and they really can kind of hit the ground running. And right, entrepreneurial spirit, it's a very loose term, right? But I believe that that is kind of what they're looking for. So let us go ahead and just go into a little bit more detail with each one of them. So logical, if you don't know, logical is actually the way that I used to explain all things when I was trying to influence or persuade someone. If you have shared something on social media and you have tried to use logic and reason to convince someone of something by itself, then you know that it is ineffective at best. And if you haven't, I would recommend that you try it just so that you know how ineffective it is. I'm telling you, you will share stuff that you're like 1 + 1 = 2. This is a slam dunk. I'm going to totally win my friend over. And then your friend will write or send like some other article. And when you read it, you read their article and you're like 1 + 1 = 3. How did they get to that? And maybe if you read it, you may be like, does it equal 1.5? Like, we'll say you're like a little bit closer than you thought. But there becomes a aspect of logic that we actually perceive everything from an emotional dynamic, and it's based off of your past life experiences and everything that you've done like so far. So if someone's life in like a rural part of the country versus someone's life in maybe the city, they're going to have different perceptions and understandings of things. And these perceptions are not easily overcome. You can't just give someone new information and think that they're going to be like, okay, everything I've known for the past 20 years is out the window, right? It doesn't really work that way. It's more common that they will disregard the information that you give them, or they'll find a way to rationalize it, or they'll connect it to, they'll make a bridge to where their current beliefs are, where it kind of minimizes the impact of what you're trying to say. But this is more likely to happen when you only use a logical approach. And I mean, I've done some of the most out there, like this is facts, there's no way. And then I'm arguing back and forth. And if you've ever had any arguments on social media, you know that they're unfruitful, that everybody leaves with the exact beliefs they came with, and you haven't achieved your goal in the least. And everybody who likes your comment and your posts and etc., they're people who already believed it. And everybody who ignores it and keeps scrolling or unfriends you or whatever they end up doing, they didn't believe you and it hasn't changed anything because we have these filters that are created with our lives, and within these filters we create our reality. So anything outside of those filters we end up blocking out, and it's actually a coping mechanism that we just can kind of get out of control if we don't ever recheck our filters on a regular basis. And the example I would give you on that is like when there is a mass shooting and they always find like a handful of people that are like, I'm really surprised that Johnny did that. Johnny's like super nice and quiet and understanding. Like, I'm really surprised that he went out there and killed all those people. And then, like, a few days later, they do the investigation, and it's not even a question of if, it was a question of when. There's so many, like, trails and breadcrumbs that it becomes to the point that people are actually more upset that the person slipped through the cracks because you find out that they left like notes on the social media, that they were being investigated, that all this other stuff. And then you go back to the original person and you're like, well, how did you not know what seems to be very obvious? It's because of their filters. Maybe they knew Johnny before that happened, and that's the filters that they had. So everything Johnny did was through the filters of the good, quiet kid. And as a result, what ends up happening is we make bad decisions. And that's true for all of us. All of us have that. And that's why it's so important to kind of adjust your filters. But to get you back on track, that's also why using the logical approach by itself is ineffective when it comes to influencing, persuading, and getting people to change their mind or help you. And that's why I recommend that you really use a lot more of the emotional approach. The emotional approach covers more. And what I mean by that is, let's say I gave you like 10 ties, and I said, choose the tie that you want. You may not know it, but you're going to make an emotional choice because at the end of the day, it's just 10 ties made out of cotton or silk or whatever it's made out of, and they're the exact same size, and generally speaking, they're just going to be different colors and different styles. So whether or not you think that this color looks better, or you think that color is too conservative, or that color is is too liberal, or this color's not for this occasion. Those are really all emotional opinions. Because I'm sure I can find someone who would find the opposite belief and they would love to wear the tie for the event that you said you should never wear that tie. And the reason is very simple, right? There is not much logic when it comes to the tie. If you find something that's cut the same size and it's the same shape and is made out of the same fabric, how do you tell them apart? How do you choose your tie? With your emotions. So when you're trying to persuade and influence other people, you want to make that emotional connection. And the best way for you to do that is to tell stories. You will have noticed that when I am doing better as far as conveying my message, I'm generally filled with a lot more stories. The stories may be 1 minute, the story may be 10 minutes, but the stories are always going to be what connects emotionally, right? You bring the person in and then they're able to absorb the information and kind of translate it back to themselves differently than me teaching, which would just be, this is what I believe, this is how I read it, and then you would absorb that and you'd be like, I don't really resonate with those words, or I don't resonate with that. So I tell a lot more stories, and then I find that that works incredibly well for really most conversations. When you're able to tell stories, the people will put themselves in the story. They will be the hero of that story, and they will relate better. So the reason that stories are really important and why they're so effective is because whatever you're passionate about, whatever you're trying to convey, that you're trying to persuade and get the yes of, even if it's like yes to a higher salary or a promotion or something like that at work, you will find that telling a story will help the person that's making that decision to put themselves in your shoes. So you're like, hey, this is what's going on in my life. This is why I believe I need the raise. Tie that with the fact that this is how long I've been with the company. These are some of my accomplishments. This is kind of the stuff I've done. This is what people are saying, right? You're like telling this life story. And then realistically, we've all been there. We've all been in the position where we needed to ask for help on something. And if you're able to tell the story in a manner that gets that person to think of that person, like who helped them when they were in the rough time, that increases the likelihood of them making that emotional connection and you getting the yes that you need. You also find when you tell stories that it helps to bring people to where you were at when you were passionate about something. So let's say you work for like a charity or you're really passionate about like kids or something like that. If you just give the stats, right, the data, the graphs, the logic, people are going to be like, okay, I understand, right? So this many kids are homeless, this many kids are abused, this many kids are hungry. But if you're able to tell the story, and that's why they do that, right? If you ever kind of see a lot of these things on TV, which I definitely recommend you cut back on the TV, and that'll be another episode within itself. But if you watch the TV and you see some of those commercials, even the ones with pets, they end up with very few words, and they're showing you them in their element. So you see where they sleep at night, you see where they go to school, you see where they get their water and what their food looks like and how the a plate of a meal looks. Even with the dogs, they show you the abused ones. They show you them limping and the sadness, and they got the music playing, and it's all emotion. Because if someone just came on and talked for 30 seconds about the problem and the need, you may reach out and be like, this is a good cause, but it just doesn't really resonate the same way, right? And so we want to make sure that we are telling the stories that we're connecting when we're trying to influence and persuade someone to get a yes. And then number three is the cooperation. When you are collaborating, consulting, or creating an alliance, you have to make sure that you are getting their input, their buy-in. You're sharing, and whenever someone can take ownership, even if it's a small portion, it changes everything dramatically, right? It helps people to be like, my opinion matters. This is important. I have to help them achieve this goal because without me, it may not work. And while that may be a slight exaggeration, it doesn't change the fact that the impact of the person that you're reaching out to, that you want to get the yes from, you see their value. And all you're doing is conveying that you see their value to them. And it's really not any more complicated than that. Like people like to feel wanted, people enjoy getting their opinions heard, and people enjoy helping to bring something across the finish line, right? Like that's just a really good feeling. And so you're just sharing that, right? Because the reality is you need to influence and persuade other people because you could not do it, or it would be very difficult for you to do it alone. And so we're just sharing the reality of our situation. I am reaching out to you because I need you to help me plan, coordinate, raise funds. I need you to speak to the people that you connect with, whatever it is. You want to also get them to be like, what do you think of this plan? Do you have any other ideas? Do you have other people that you would recommend that we talk to? And you'll find that once you get the person kind of bought into the cause, then it works really well. So in the example of the charity, that's probably very easy, but then you may be thinking, well, how does that work with like a promotion or a raise? Well, let's say for some reason the answer is no. And the answer is no because it's outside of your manager's control. There is a hiring freeze, there is a freeze in salaries, whatever is going on with the company, then you can ask them, what do I need to do to position myself to get that raise or promotion? And immediately your manager is going to be thinking now not of how to keep you from getting a promotion, they're going to be thinking how to give you a promotion. And that's already like half the battle by itself. So now if you do everything that the manager recommended, then they are going to go to bat for you. They're going to be speaking on your behalf. They're going to be letting people know, like, hey, this person, I told them last year to do ABC, and they did ABCDEF. And you're going to be like, oh my goodness. Like, I didn't know that you were such an advocate for me. I really appreciate that. Because again, you've made the connection emotionally. You've already connected with them logically, right? We understand if you've been working for a long time in a company and you ask for a raise or a promotion, that's right. It's a pretty logical progression. Like, I want to grow my career. And then number three, you actually ask them and get their buy-in where you're working with them. You're building an alliance. In this case, you're using their authority to your benefit, right? They're going to be the influencer. They're going to be in the boardroom meetings. They're going to be when people are in meetings and they're saying, hey, who would be a good fit for this new position? And then they're going to be like, oh, I think Dre would be a great fit. You know, Dre has been working on this, and that this past year, and he's done a really good job. And he was ready and he asked me for more responsibility last year, but it just wasn't available, and he's been just great about it. And you're like, okay, well, let's bring him on in. Let's see what's going on. And you win, right? You've persuaded, you've used their authority to your benefit. You've consulted with them and collaborated where now you put a plan together to achieve your goal. And we'll close where I'll just use a very quick and dirty example of going to a car dealership. That would have all three in there. So when you go into the car dealership, what's the first thing that the salesperson asks you? They ask you what kind of make and model you want, right? We're starting with the logic. What is it that you want? And then they'll be like, okay, what's your price range? What kind of, and then, you know, maybe the miles per gallon and colors, right? You may get into a lot of these different logic things, but realistically, you're going to probably start with a few. And then you're going to start looking at the stuff, right? This is the logic. And then when they're pitching it to you, they're going to be talking about some of the features, right? Like the safety ratings and the miles per gallon, because they want to help you make that logical decision. But they don't stop there. They keep going. Now they bring in the emotional. And when you bring in the emotional, what do you do when you bring in the emotional at a car dealership? Well, the salesperson starts talking about how many people have purchased this car and how everybody loves it, and how, like, I remember last time I went there, like, oh, this is so hard to get this car as a used car because everybody keeps it. Everybody loves it. And I'm like, oh, wow, lucky me, right? I chose a car that everybody loves. But they're really speaking on the emotional aspect. They want you to understand two emotion tactics, you know, that would be for another time, just because of the time we have, would be scarcity, which is the idea that, hey, everybody loves this, it's going really well, and there's only so many because everybody loves it. And then the other one would be like social proof. Hey, this is the reviews that we're getting, and it's going great. And you find that when you have those two aspects, it persuades you, right? If you've ever gone on Amazon and you went to go purchase something, and you looked at the reviews and you're kind of like, maybe I won't get it anymore. And then they even added this other one where it's like, hey, people who bought this bought these two things. And then you find yourself considering those two things. You're like, what do those people know that I don't know? Right? And so these are two aspects of emotional connection with social proof and scarcity. When you think that something is going to be gone, right? That's why, like, Publix does a weekly sale. That's why Winn-Dixie does a weekly sale, because they want you to know, like, this is going to be gone at the end of this week. So if you like these deals, you need to come in because they won't be there. Don't sit around being like, oh, I'll get it in a week. No, it won't be there in a week. You got to come right now. And then on the other end of it, right, the social proof, that's just very simple. We all see the impact of reviews. We all see the impact of recommendations from other people. And we all see the impact of just the comfort of knowing that it's okay to go this route because it's been traveled by a few people. And so when you want to make that emotional connection, when you're trying to persuade and influence and get more yeses, share some of these stories, right? Like sometimes people share the salaries on glass ceiling or glass door, right? I knew I was wrong, but I just couldn't figure it out quick enough. But on glass door, and sometimes people share stuff that has to do with the number of years that they've had and how much that person would make on average, or even I remember when I got my first job out of college, it was very close to the recession, so it was a very depressed wage. And one of the tactics that I used was you're paying this amount to brand new kids out of college now because we're 2 years out of the recession, and that is still below where I started with the 2% raise each year, right? So you're able to kind of figure that in there. So you kind of use that stuff. Now back to the car dealership. I know, right? I just too many stories, too many stories. So then the very last one is the collaboration, and this is actually the fun one. So it's a two-part process. Number one is they ask you to take the test drive. And so now you are selling yourself on the car. You're driving, and they're like, how does it feel? And then you're answering, how does it feel in the car? And so now they're consulting with you. And then if they dragged your kids in there with you, they're in the back seat like, oh, it's so clean and wonderful back here. And you're thinking, of course, because you haven't messed it up yet, but you're going to mess it up later. Maybe you should keep the car clean. How about that if you like the clean one? But I digress. I have 4 kids if you don't know. And then you come back to the dealership, and then what do? They sit you down, and they're like, let's see what the rate will look like. And you're like, sure, I'd love to see what the rate will look like. And then that starts the second half where you build the alliance. Somehow, over the period of those hours that you've been in there, the car dealer or the car salesman has positioned themselves as your alliance advocate. Every time they go in to talk to the finance manager, they come back and they're like, dude, I'm fighting for you. Like, they want to give us a rate of this, but I told them that your budget is this, and you're like, yeah, my budget is that. I can't go up that high. And then they go and they come back and they're like, oh, the car owner, he's like mad at me. He said I'm giving away all of his cars for like nothing, but I'm trying to get you the best deal possible. And you're like, yeah, thank you. And then they even talk about like, oh, maybe I can get you a great rate on your car loan, the interest rate. And you're like, man, I really appreciate that. And over these several hours, you can see that they are influencing you by taking the fact that they've already given you the logic, they've already done the emotion, and now you're collaborating together. Somehow they have positioned themselves as your advocate where it's you and them versus the finance manager and the owner of the car lot. And now, obviously, us here talking, we understand that that's not actually what's going on, because once you buy the car, you're going to leave and they're going to get back to work. And if they were burning bridges, then they would leave with you when you leave because they wouldn't have a job anymore. But we understand that that is just a part of their influencing tactics, right? And that's when all of us understand that you don't really need to be in a car dealership all day to buy a car, but they understand that it's a part of the value, right? Like if they just gave you the car, they believe, and it's partially true, that subconsciously you're going to be like, well, I guess I didn't get a great deal. Like if I tried harder, it would have been more difficult, and maybe I could have got a lower rate or a lower payment or a lower purchase rate. So they want you to feel like you're putting in some work, so that you subconsciously are like, okay, this was like moving heaven and earth, so it must be a great deal. It's just a part of persuasion, but it's an effective part, and so that's why they do that. Now that's also why companies like CarMax, where they're like, hey, the sticker rate is what you pay, is why it's a multi-billion-dollar industry or a multi-billion-dollar company, because they have taken that part out. They know people don't like that aspect of it. And if you ever look at when they sell, they don't sell the logic. They're not selling you the fact that, hey, we sell cars, right? Well, duh. They're selling you on the emotion. If you feel like you're being taken advantage of, if you feel overwhelmed trying to negotiate with these people, if you're tired of trying to figure out if you're getting the best rate, they're like, come to CarMax. And they said, because our salespeople don't get paid the same, right? So they're speaking on emotion and speaking on the alliance, and it's super effective. So you would be doing the same thing. And that's just what I recommend to you whenever you're trying to get yeses. Tell stories. Make sure you're connecting your logic with their values, and that's what emotion really comes down to. and that you have some sort of a collaboration, some sort of a cooperative agreement with each other, because you'll find that that will be the best way for you to get that influence. So if you have any stories of your own, I invite you to share them in the comments. Again, this is just a sliver from the course that I created on getting more yeses within You Forecast Hope. If you are interested in learning more, I invite you to go to youforecasthope.com and you can kind of see for yourself. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can email me, put them in the comments. If you want to email me, it's Andre@forecasthope.com, and that's Andre with a U, Undre. If you want to put them in the comments, that's fine. If you want to join our Facebook group, you just go to talkmindsetchange.com and it'll redirect you to the Facebook group. And if you don't have access to that, then you would just go conquer doubt and fear of failure, and you'll find the Facebook group as well. Again, I thank you for your time. Continue blessings. My name is Dre with Forecast Hope. I am your mentor of change, and have a great one.